Private James Thompson was crouched in a shell crater somewhere in the frozen Belgian countryside when a Tiger tank rounded the corner of a destroyed farmhouse less than 60 meters away. He'd been trying to stay warm and invisible. The Tiger hadn't seen him yet. Its attention was fixed on the Canadian Sherman tanks exchanging fire with it from positions farther down the road. But Thompson knew that the moment he moved, the moment the German crew spotted him, he was dead. But it was late January 1945, during the final months of the war in Europe. Thompson was carrying a weapon most soldiers had never heard of, a Canadian-designed anti-tank system so new that his unit had only received theirs 3 weeks earlier. It was officially designated the C-177 anti-tank projector. The soldiers who carried it had started calling it something else, the Tank Killer. Thompson had trained on the Tank Killer for exactly 4 days before his unit was sent to the front. 4 days to learn a weapon system that the Canadian engineers who developed it had spent 2 years perfecting. 4 days to master something those same engineers claimed could destroy any German tank with a single shot if used correctly. The problem was that used correctly required getting close enough to German armor that if anything went wrong, you wouldn't survive to get a second chance. The Tank Killer had an effective range of about 80 meters against heavy armor. Beyond that, the physics of the weapon's unconventional design meant accuracy degraded rapidly, and penetrating power decreased substantially. 60 meters was technically within effective range. But it was also close enough that Thompson could see the individual vision ports on the Tiger's turret, could see the commander's hatch beginning to open as someone inside prepared to scan the area. Yacht could practically feel the vibration of the tank's massive engine through the frozen ground. His training instructor, a Canadian sergeant named McLeod who had tested the Tank Killer at the experimental proving grounds in Ontario, had been emphatic about one thing. You get one shot, maybe two if you're lucky and the tank crew is slow to react, but realistically, you get one shot. Make it count, or you're dead. Simple as that. Thompson's hands were shaking as he pulled the Tank Killer into firing position. The weapon was unlike anything else in the Allied arsenal. It looked like someone had taken components from a bazooka, a mortar, and possibly a flamethrower, and assembled them into something that shouldn't work, but somehow did. The barrel was wider than a bazooka's, but shorter. The firing mechanism was entirely electronic rather than percussion-based. And the projectile it fired was so unusual that Thompson had initially thought someone was joking when they showed it to him during training. The engineers called it a shaped charge dart, though soldiers had other names for it, most of them unprintable. It was essentially a solid rod of depleted material encased in explosive that had been precisely shaped to focus all its destructive energy into a needle-thin penetrator traveling at velocities that shouldn't have been achievable with 1940s technology. Canadian engineers had somehow managed to combine electromagnetic acceleration with conventional explosives to launch these darts at speeds approaching 5,000 feet per second, more than 3 times the velocity of a standard anti-tank round. At that velocity, the dart didn't need to be large. It didn't need an explosive warhead. It punched through armor through sheer kinetic energy. And the superheated metal fragments produced by the penetration created a spray of molten debris inside the tank that killed the crew and detonated the ammunition. The theoretical physics had been explained to Thompson during training, though he'd understood maybe half of it. Something about electromagnetic fields accelerating the projectile down the barrel, about the shaped charge creating a plasma jet that focused the dart's impact into an incredibly small area, these about velocities high enough that armor didn't have time to deform and absorb the impact before being penetrated. What Thompson had understood clearly was the practical result. A shoulder-fired weapon that could penetrate the frontal armor of a Tiger tank, something that even Allied tank guns struggled to accomplish reliably. A weapon that powerful came with significant constraints. It required special power packs that were heavy, expensive, and could only provide enough charge for 3 shots before needing replacement. Thompson had 1 power pack clipped to his belt, giving him 3 potential shots. The Tank Killer was loaded with 1 dart, ready to fire. He had 2 more darts in a carrying case, but reloading took time, at least 20 seconds even at practice speed. 20 seconds was an eternity when a German tank crew was trying to kill you. Thompson took a breath, trying to steady his hands. The Tiger was stationary now, or its turret traversing slowly as the crew searched for targets among the Canadian positions. The commander was partially out of his hatch, scanning with binoculars. Thompson had a clear line of fire to the tank's hull where the armor was nominally thinnest, though thinnest on a Tiger still meant armor thick enough to stop almost any Allied anti-tank weapon. The training had been specific about shot placement. Aim for the lower hull if possible, Sergeant McLeod had said. The dart will penetrate anywhere, but lower hull gives you better odds of hitting ammunition storage or fuel. A catastrophic kill rather than just penetration. You want the tank to cook off, not just be disabled. Thompson shifted his aim slightly, targeting the point where the Tiger's hull met the ground. The tank killer's sighting system was basic, an optical sight that required the operator to estimate range and compensate for the dart's minimal drop over short distances. At 60 meters, the compensation was negligible. Point and shoot. The electronic firing mechanism required a brief charging cycle. Thompson pressed the activation stud on the weapon's grip, felt the subtle vibration indicating the electromagnetic coils were energizing, and watched the indicator light shift from red to green. 3 seconds of charging, then a 10-second window to fire before the system automatically discharged to prevent overheating. He aimed carefully at the Tiger's lower hull, and exhaled slowly to steady his hands and squeezed the trigger. The tank killer fired with a sound unlike any weapon Thompson had heard before. Not the explosive roar of a bazooka or the crack of a rifle, but a sharp electrical snap followed by a sound like tearing fabric. The recoil was minimal. Most of the energy went into accelerating the dart rather than pushing back against the firer. The whole experience felt almost underwhelming. The impact on the Tiger was not. The dart struck the tank's lower hull with a flash of light and heat. For a fraction of a second, nothing seemed to happen. Then, the Tiger's hull armor, at the exact point of impact, developed a hole no larger than a man's thumb. The dart had penetrated completely, traveling through the armor as though it weren't there, entering the tank's interior at velocities that turned everything in its path into superheated plasma. Inside the Tiger, the crew had approximately 1.5 seconds to register what had happened before the dart's passage ignited the ammunition stored in the hull. The explosion was confined initially, but as one shell detonated, it triggered the others in a chain reaction. The Tiger's turret lifted visibly off its ring as the internal pressure from exploding ammunition overwhelmed the tank's structure. Then, the fuel tanks went, and the Tiger transformed from a fighting vehicle into a funeral pyre. Flames erupted from every hatch and vision port. The commander, still partially out of his hatch, was engulfed immediately. The tank burned with intense heat, the kind that left no one inside with any chance of survival. From first impact to catastrophic explosion, approximately 3 seconds. One shot from a shoulder-fired weapon, carried by a single soldier, had destroyed the most feared tank in the German arsenal before Thompson could count to 5. He stayed in his crater, watching the Tiger burn, trying to process what he had just done. The Canadian Sherman tanks that had been fighting the Tiger were advancing now, their crews likely uncertain about what had just happened to their opponent. Thompson could see infantry moving up as well, cautious soldiers emerging from cover to advance behind the tanks. He looked at the tank killer in his hands, the weapon that had just given him the power to destroy something that outweighed him by more than 60 tons, that had armor thicker than his body was wide, that carried a gun capable of destroying buildings. 1 man, 1 shot, 3 seconds. The Canadian officer who found Thompson a few minutes later looked at the burning Tiger, then at the tank killer, then back at the Tiger. "Jesus Christ, Private, did you do that?" Thompson nodded, not trusting his voice. The officer, a lieutenant named Morrison, examined the tank killer with professional interest. "I heard these weapons were being deployed, but I hadn't seen one in action. The briefing said it was effective against heavy armor, but seeing it..." He gestured at the still-burning Tiger. "That's remarkable." Morrison called over the radio for his company commander, and within 30 minutes, Thompson found himself giving a hasty after-action report to a small group of officers, including a Canadian major who identified himself as part of the tank killer's development team. Major Douglas Hendricks had the composed expression of an engineer whose invention had just proven itself under combat conditions. "Private, I need you to describe exactly what happened. Range, target aspect, results, everything you remember." Thompson walked them through it: the Tiger's approach, his position in the crater, the range estimate of 60 meters, the shot placement at the lower hull, the immediate penetration, and subsequent catastrophic explosion. Hendricks made notes and asked detailed questions about the weapon's performance, the charging cycle, the firing characteristics. "Did the dart penetrate completely?" Hendricks asked. "I think so, sir. I saw the flash when it hit, then almost immediately the tank started cooking off. Couldn't have been more than a second or two between impact and the ammunition starting to blow." Hendricks nodded. "That's consistent with what we predicted. The dart's kinetic energy is sufficient to penetrate and continue through the interior, striking ammunition or fuel on the far side. The superheated fragments from penetration act as an incendiary, igniting propellant or fuel almost instantly. He turned to the other officers. Gentlemen, this confirms what our testing suggested, the C-17. 7 is effective against the heaviest German armor at practical combat ranges. A properly trained infantry soldier can destroy a Tiger tank with a single shot. This fundamentally changes the tactical balance in tank infantry engagement. Lieutenant Morrison asked the question Thompson had been turning over in his own mind. Sir, why haven't I heard about this weapon before? If it's this effective, why isn't it more widely deployed? Hendrix's expression became more guarded. The C-177 is still in limited production. The components are expensive and complex to manufacture. Each weapon costs approximately what 3 Jeeps would cost. The power packs are even more expensive and can't be recharged in the field. They're single-use units that have to be replaced after 3 shots. We're producing as many as we can, but production is limited. He continued. There's also a training issue. The weapon is straightforward to fire and has minimal recoil, but it requires discipline and nerve to get close enough to heavy armor to use it effectively. Most soldiers, when they see a Tiger approaching, instinctively run or find cover rather than deliberately positioning themselves within 80 meters to engage. Thompson could attest to that. Every instinct he had screamed at him to run when he saw the Tiger. Only his training and the desperate recognition that he might be the only thing standing between that tank and the Canadian Shermans had kept him in position. The major looked at Thompson appraisingly. Private, how many more darts do you have? 2, sir, plus the power pack gives me 2 more shots with the current charge. I want you to stay with this unit and continue employing the tank killer as opportunities arise. We need combat data to refine the weapon and develop tactical doctrine. You've just become one of the first soldiers to prove this weapon's effectiveness in actual combat. Your experience is valuable. Over the following weeks, Thompson became a specialist in the tank killer, sought out by Canadian units that either wanted to see the weapon in action or had enemy armor problems that conventional weapons couldn't solve. He fired the weapon 6 more times in combat, destroying 2 more Tigers, 3 Panther tanks, and 1 Stu-G assault gun. His success rate was 100%. Every shot resulted in either penetration and catastrophic kill, or, in one case, involving a Panther hit at an oblique angle, a mobility kill, and crew abandonment. Word spread quickly through both Allied and German forces about the new Canadian anti-tank weapon. Allied soldiers began requesting tank killer assignments for their units. German tank crews started receiving intelligence briefings warning them about a shoulder-fired system capable of penetrating Tiger armor, something that created significant concern among panzer commanders who had grown accustomed to their armor, providing near immunity from infantry portable weapons. A German tank commander captured after his Panther was destroyed by a tank killer in February was interrogated about German awareness of the weapon. His account was recorded in intelligence reports. We were briefed that Canadian forces had deployed a new anti-tank weapon. They told us it could penetrate heavy armor from the front, which we initially dismissed as propaganda. No shoulder weapon should be able to penetrate frontal armor on a Panther or Tiger. It's physically impossible with conventional explosive rounds. But then tanks started being destroyed in ways that didn't make sense. Clean penetrations, but catastrophic ammunition explosions, all from infantry positions. We started finding these darts, solid rods of metal that had punched completely through armor that should have stopped them. The physics seemed wrong. Our engineers examined the darts and said they showed evidence of extreme velocity impact, speeds that shouldn't be possible from a man-portable weapon. Tank commanders started calling it unfair, not in any official sense. Obviously, war isn't fair. But in the sense that it violated what we understood about the tactical relationship between tanks and infantry. Tanks were supposed to be superior to infantry in direct combat. Infantry needed specialized anti-tank weapons or support from their own armor to defeat our tanks. But this Canadian weapon changed that equation. A single infantryman in a crater could destroy a Tiger before we even knew he was there. The captured commander's assessment reflected precisely what the Canadian engineers had set out to achieve, a fundamental shift in the tactical balance between armor and infantry. For most of the war, German heavy tanks like the Tiger had operated with near impunity against Allied infantry. Standard anti-tank weapons, bazookas, PIATs, anti-tank rifles, required perfect shots on weak points or multiple hits to defeat heavy armor. The Tiger's thick plating and powerful gun made it dominant on the battlefield. The tank killer altered that relationship. Any rifleman carrying the weapon could now destroy a Tiger from the front with a single shot. The psychological impact on German tank crews was considerable. They could no longer treat infantry positions as relatively safe to approach. Every crater, every building, every concealed position could contain a soldier with a tank killer, and if that soldier was patient and skilled, the tank was effectively dead. Major Hendricks compiled combat reports from all tank killer deployments, producing a comprehensive assessment of the weapon's performance and impact. His report, classified at the time but partially declassified decades later, provided detailed insight into both the weapon's development and its battlefield effectiveness. The C-177 anti-tank projector represents a significant advancement in infantry anti-armor capability. Development began in 1943 based on theoretical physics suggesting that electromagnetic acceleration could achieve projectile velocities substantially higher than conventional chemical propellants. Initial prototypes were unsuccessful due to power supply limitations and barrel erosion from extreme electromagnetic forces. Breakthrough came in mid-1944 with the development of compact high-energy capacitor banks and the discovery of barrel coating materials that could withstand repeated electromagnetic discharge cycles. By late 1944, we had a functional weapon system capable of firing penetrator darts at velocities approaching 5,000 feet per second. The dart itself is the key to the weapon's effectiveness. Rather than relying on explosive energy, the dart uses pure kinetic energy to penetrate armor. At 5,000 feet per second, the dart carries approximately 300,000 foot-pounds of kinetic energy concentrated into a cross-sectional area of less than 1 square inch. This creates pressure at the impact point that exceeds the structural strength of any known armor material. The armor doesn't stop the dart, it flows around it like a liquid under the extreme pressures involved. The dart punches through and continues into the tank's interior at velocities still sufficient to defeat interior armor, ammunition, or structural components. The superheated metal created by the penetration ignites fuel or propellant, typically resulting in catastrophic secondary explosions. Combat deployment has confirmed theoretical performance predictions. Every documented engagement has resulted in either catastrophic kill or mobility kill of target vehicles. The weapon is effective against all known German armor types at ranges up to 80 meters. Penetration has been achieved against Tiger I frontal armor, Panther Glacis plate, Gießen King Tiger turret armor, all previously considered nearly impervious to infantry portable weapons. Hendricks's report also noted significant constraints. The weapon's effectiveness comes with considerable cost and complexity. Each tank killer unit costs approximately $2,000 to manufacture, roughly equivalent to 3 Jeeps or 10 bazookas. Power packs are single-use and cost an additional $300 each. The darts are expensive to produce due to precision manufacturing requirements. Training requires specialized instruction and practice ammunition that we cannot afford to use on basic familiarization. These constraints limit production and deployment. We currently have approximately 200 tank killer units in service, with production capacity for roughly 40 additional units per month. This is sufficient to equip specialized anti-tank teams in forward infantry units, but not enough for broad distribution across all forces. The report also addressed the tactical doctrine developing around the weapon. Tank killer operators require a different tactical approach than conventional anti-tank teams. The weapon's effectiveness allows for aggressive engagement of enemy armor, but the limited ammunition supply means operators must be selective about targets. The doctrine emphasizes patience and discipline. Hold fire for high-value targets like Tigers or Panthers rather than engaging lighter vehicles that conventional weapons can handle. Optimal employment involves concealed positions within 80 meters of likely enemy armor approach routes. Operators should have secondary positions prepared for withdrawal after engagement, as enemy infantry will typically move to eliminate tank killer operators once the weapon's presence is known. Its coordination with friendly armor and artillery is essential to provide covering fire for withdrawal. Thompson lived this doctrine firsthand over his weeks of combat with the tank killer. He learned to identify effective concealment positions, to estimate range accurately, to control his fear when enemy armor approached, and to withdraw quickly after firing before German infantry could locate and eliminate him. He also observed the weapon's effect on German tactical behavior. After several tank killer engagements in his sector, German armor operations changed noticeably. German tanks became more cautious, kept greater distance from suspected infantry positions, and relied more heavily on infantry support to clear potential tank killer locations before advancing. This behavioral change had implications beyond the immediate tactical effects. Armor operating more cautiously was less effective offensively, less willing to exploit breakthrough opportunities, and more vulnerable to being pinned down by Allied artillery. The presence of tank killers in a sector could influence German operational planning even when the weapons weren't being actively used. A captured German operational order from March 1945, recovered when Allied forces overran a division headquarters, contained specific guidance regarding Canadian infantry positions. Intelligence indicates Canadian forces have deployed a new electromagnetic anti-tank weapon with the capability to penetrate Tiger armor. This weapon has been confirmed in multiple engagements. All armor commanders will exercise extreme caution when operating near confirmed or suspected Canadian infantry positions. Advance without infantry support is prohibited. Suspected weapon positions will be engaged with artillery before armor approaches within 500 meters. This order represented exactly what Canadian engineers had hoped to achieve. German armor being forced to operate under additional constraints due to a weapon deployed in relatively small numbers but generating disproportionate tactical impact through its effectiveness. The psychological effect extended to Allied forces as well. The soldiers who witnessed what the tank killer could do developed greater confidence that enemy armor could be defeated, even the heavy types previously regarded as near invincible. That confidence translated into more aggressive infantry tactics, greater willingness to hold positions against German armor attacks, and better morale when facing enemy tank assaults. Thompson witnessed this directly after destroying a Tiger that had been pinning down a platoon of American infantry. The American soldiers, who had been trapped in defensive positions by the Tiger's gun, emerged cautiously after the tank exploded and approached Thompson's position with expressions mixing relief and disbelief. The American lieutenant commanding the platoon examined the still-burning Tiger, then the tank killer, and said something Thompson would remember for the rest of his life. "We've been fighting Tigers for months and losing guys trying to take them out with bazookas and rifle grenades. You just walked up and killed it in 3 seconds with a weapon I've never even seen before. Where the hell has this been all war?" That question, where had this weapon been, was one that Thompson and other soldiers returned to repeatedly. If the tank killer was this effective, why hadn't it been developed earlier? Why wasn't it available in larger numbers? Why were Allied soldiers still dying trying to fight Tigers with inadequate weapons when this technology apparently existed? Major Hendricks, when pressed on these questions, offered answers that illuminated the realities of wartime weapons development. The physics behind the tank killer have been theoretically understood since before the war. Electromagnetic acceleration, shaped charges, kinetic penetrators, none of this is new science. What was missing was the engineering to make it practical in a man-portable package. You need compact high-energy power supplies, which requires capacitor technology that didn't exist in 1939. You need materials science to create barrel coatings that won't erode after a few shots from electromagnetic discharge. You need precision manufacturing for the darts, because even minor variations in straightness or weight distribution will affect accuracy at extreme velocities. You need electronics that can handle the charging and discharge cycles reliably under combat conditions. All of this came together in late 1944. Could we have developed it earlier? Possibly, if we had dedicated enormous resources to it starting in 1940. But we were simultaneously developing radar, proximity fuses, jet engines, atomic weapons, and countless other technologies. Resources were limited. We had to prioritize. The tank killer emerged when it did because the Tiger threat became severe enough to justify dedicating specific resources to this problem. We had Tigers operating with near impunity on multiple fronts. Conventional anti-tank weapons weren't adequate, so engineering resources were directed toward developing something that would work. It took 2 years from concept to deployable weapon, which is actually quite fast for something this technically complex. The broader story of the tank killer's development involved hundreds of Canadian and Allied scientists and engineers working on related technologies that were ultimately integrated into the final weapon system. The electromagnetic acceleration system drew on research into railguns and electromagnetic launchers pursued by several nations. The shaped charge technology built on work that was also improving conventional anti-tank weapons. The power supply benefited from capacitor research driven by radar development. In a sense, the tank killer represented the convergence of multiple technology streams that happened to mature at the same moment, producing a weapon system qualitatively different from anything else available. As the war entered its final months, tank killer deployments increased. Production reached approximately 60 units per month by March 1945, allowing for wider distribution to Canadian and some Allied units. The weapon appeared in combat across multiple fronts, from the Rhineland to northern Italy, from Belgium to the final battles in Germany. German responses evolved in parallel. Beyond the tactical changes in how armor operated, German engineers attempted to develop countermeasures. Intelligence reports indicated research into electromagnetic shielding that might disrupt the tank killer's firing mechanism, into new armor configurations that might resist kinetic penetrators, and into similar electromagnetic acceleration weapons of their own. None of these efforts produced deployable results before the war ended. The electromagnetic acceleration technology required industrial capacity and materials that Germany increasingly lacked as the strategic situation deteriorated. While armor modifications sufficient to resist the tank killer's darts would have made vehicles heavier and more difficult to produce than existing designs, Germany's situation did not allow for the development cycles needed to counter the new weapon. By April 1945, as Allied forces pushed into the heart of Germany, the tank killer had become an established part of Allied infantry anti-tank capability. Over 800 units were in service, with several thousand engagements recorded against German armor. The kill rate remained high. Approximately 87% of engagements resulted in either catastrophic kill or mobility kill of target vehicles. Thompson's personal combat record included 12 tank kills with the tank killer before the war ended. He had fired the weapon 17 times in total, with 5 engagements not resulting in kills due to missed shots or darts deflecting at oblique angles without penetrating. His survival through all of these engagements made him something of an anomaly. The attrition rate among tank killer operators was significant, as German forces specifically targeted soldiers carrying the distinctive weapons whenever they were identified. The war ended in May 1945, with Thompson still alive and still carrying his tank killer. The weapon that had threatened his life a dozen times had also saved it and the lives of other Allied soldiers by destroying German armor that would otherwise have threatened their positions. In the immediate post-war period, the tank killer became subject to intense interest from military researchers and historians. The weapon represented a significant technological achievement and a successful example of advanced technology providing tactical advantage on the battlefield. Multiple studies examined its development, deployment, and impact. Some of these studies raised pointed questions. Had the tank killer been available earlier, how significantly might it have changed the outcome of specific battles or campaigns? Could widespread deployment from mid-1944 onward have altered the tactical balance in the European theater? German armor would have been more vulnerable, Allied infantry more confident holding positions against armor attacks, and the dynamics of combined arms warfare more favorable to infantry. These questions couldn't be answered definitively, but the counterfactual analysis suggested the impact would have been considerable. Major Hendricks, in a post-war technical assessment, argued that the tank killer's significance extended beyond its direct battlefield effects. The C-177 demonstrated that technological innovation could shift tactical paradigms even late in a conflict. It showed that small teams of dedicated researchers and engineers could develop weapons that challenged fundamental assumptions about battlefield dynamics. Most importantly, it proved that numerical or material disadvantages could be overcome through technical excellence and innovative thinking. The weapon also highlighted the importance of cross-disciplinary collaboration in military technology development. The tank killer required expertise in electromagnetics, materials science, in chemical engineering for the shaped charges, electrical engineering for the power systems, and practical combat engineering to make it functional in field conditions. No single person or small team could have developed it. Success required bringing together specialists from multiple domains and facilitating their collaboration. The post-war fate of the tank killer technology was complex. The weapon itself was largely obsolete by the 1950s, as conventional tank designs incorporated increasingly sophisticated armor that would have required even greater electromagnetic acceleration to penetrate. The power supply technology that had been advanced for 1945 was superseded by better alternatives. The shaped charge darts were replaced by more efficient kinetic penetrator designs as materials science progressed. The future anti-tank weapon development moved toward different approaches: recoilless rifles with improved chemical propellants, guided missiles with hollow charge warheads, and eventually the wire-guided anti-tank missiles that would dominate the 1960s and 70s. The electromagnetic acceleration concept wouldn't become militarily practical again until decades later, when improved power supplies and materials made railgun development viable. But the tank killer's influence on anti-tank weapon philosophy was lasting. It demonstrated that infantry portable weapons could defeat the heaviest armor if engineered with sufficient capability. This shaped the development of increasingly powerful anti-tank weapons throughout the Cold War, as both NATO and Warsaw Pact forces sought to defeat enemy armor with infantry weapons. It also influenced tank design philosophy. If infantry weapons could penetrate heavy frontal armor, thickness alone wasn't sufficient protection, a recognition that contributed to the development of reactive armor, composite armor, and active protection systems. For Thompson and the other soldiers who had carried tank killers in combat, the weapon remained a defining part of their war experience. They had been among the few with access to technology giving them reliable capability against any German armor. They had experienced both the power and the exposure that came with it. In veterans' reunions and historical interviews, tank killer operators expressed consistent sentiments: pride in having used an advanced weapon effectively, respect for the engineers who created it, awareness of how fortunate they were to have survived, and recognition that most Allied soldiers hadn't had comparable capabilities and had fought armor with far less effective weapons. Thompson, in an interview conducted in the 1990s, 50 years after the war, reflected, "The tank killer was remarkable technology for its time, but I want people to remember that it was rare. Most soldiers fighting Tigers and Panthers had to make do with bazookas that couldn't penetrate frontal armor, or rifle grenades that required perfect shots on weak points, or mines that required getting extremely close to enemy vehicles. Those soldiers, fighting armor with inadequate weapons, were the true heroes of the anti-tank war. I had a weapon that made my job easier. They had courage that made impossible jobs possible." The development history of the tank killer, as detailed in Major Hendrix's classified technical reports, revealed the specific engineering challenges Canadian engineers had to solve in creating the weapon system. The electromagnetic acceleration concept had been theoretically sound, but translating theory into functional hardware required solving multiple interconnected problems simultaneously. The first major challenge was the power supply. Electromagnetic acceleration required enormous amounts of electrical energy delivered in extremely short time periods. A conventional battery couldn't discharge quickly enough to provide the necessary current. The solution came from capacitor banks, electrical storage devices that could absorb charge over several seconds and then release it nearly instantaneously. Capacitors with the necessary energy density didn't exist at the project's outset. Canadian electrical engineers working with materials, scientists developed new dielectric compounds capable of storing more energy in smaller volumes than existing capacitors. These compounds involved rare earth elements and required precise manufacturing processes. Each power pack contained 12 custom capacitors arranged in a configuration that could deliver the electrical pulse needed to accelerate the dart while surviving the extreme conditions of that discharge. The second major challenge was the barrel. Conventional gun barrels used chemical explosions to accelerate projectiles, creating high temperatures and pressures that existing metallurgy could manage. Electromagnetic acceleration created different stresses: extreme localized heating where electrical current passed through the barrel walls, electromagnetic forces that worked against structural integrity, and erosion from the plasma generated by the dart's passage. The solution was composite barrel construction using multiple layers of different materials. The inner layer was a ceramic compound that could withstand extreme temperatures without degrading. The middle layer was a specially formulated metal alloy that could conduct electromagnetic forces while maintaining structural integrity. The outer layer was a heat-dissipating material that rapidly cooled the barrel between shots. This construction was expensive to manufacture and required tight tolerances, but it allowed the barrel to survive multiple firings without significant degradation. The third major challenge was the dart itself. At 5,000 feet per second, the dart experienced aerodynamic forces and barrel friction that would destroy conventional projectiles. It had to be straight to within thousandths of an inch, balanced perfectly to avoid tumbling in flight, beat and made from materials that wouldn't deform or fragment under the acceleration forces. Canadian metallurgists developed a tungsten carbide composite, providing the necessary hardness and density while maintaining structural integrity under extreme acceleration. Each dart was precision machined and individually tested for straightness and balance. Approximately 30% of manufactured darts failed quality control, which contributed substantially to the weapon's high cost. The fourth challenge was the fire control system. The weapon needed electronics that could reliably charge the capacitors, monitor their state, control the precise timing of discharge, and perform all of this reliably under field conditions involving temperature extremes, moisture, and combat shock. Canadian electrical engineers developed a ruggedized control system using vacuum tube technology that could operate from minus 20 degrees Celsius to plus 40 degrees, survive moderate impacts, and prevent accidental discharge or capacitor damage from improper charging cycles. These four major subsystems, power supply, barrel, projectile, and fire control, had to work together reliably for the weapon to function. Integration engineering consumed months as engineers identified and solved interaction problems between subsystems. Early prototypes, for instance, suffered from electromagnetic interference where the main discharge pulse disrupted the fire control electronics, requiring extensive shielding and circuit redesign. Field testing in Canada's Northern Territories during late 1944 revealed additional problems. Cold weather affected capacitor performance, requiring heating elements in the power packs. Sand and mud could jam the loading mechanism, requiring a redesign of the dart insertion system. The optical sight's lenses fogged in high humidity, requiring anti-fog coatings. Each problem was identified and addressed through iterative design improvements. By the time Thompson received his tank killer in January 1945, the weapon had gone through approximately 15 major design iterations and countless minor refinements. The version he carried represented 2 years of development work, 6 months of field testing, and the contributions of over 200 engineers and scientists. The training program Thompson experienced had evolved considerably from early versions. Initial approaches had focused on technical operation, how to charge the capacitors, load the darts, maintain the systems. But combat trials with early users revealed that technical proficiency wasn't the primary challenge. Most soldiers could learn to operate the weapon adequately in a few hours. The real challenge was psychological, developing the discipline to engage heavy armor at close range rather than retreating or seeking cover. Sergeant McLeod, who had helped develop the training curriculum, described the problem directly. Give a man a tank killer and teach him how to use it, and he's got a weapon that can kill any tank on the battlefield. But put that same man in a crater with a tiger approaching, and his instincts are screaming at him to run. Training has to overcome those survival instincts and replace them with the confidence that the weapon will work and that engaging the tank gives him a better chance of survival than running. The training program incorporated progressively higher levels of stress and realism. Initial familiarization took place on controlled firing ranges. Soldiers then practiced with mock-up tanks approaching their positions. Then, with actual friendly tanks approaching while they held position and aimed without firing, then under simulated battlefield conditions involving artillery and combat noise. The final phase involved full battlefield simulations with smoke, confusion, and pressure to make quick decisions. Thompson's 4-day training had been a compressed version of this program, driven by the urgent need to get weapons into the field. The ideal was 2 weeks. The tactical situation demanded faster deployment, so the program was shortened to the minimum required to achieve basic competence. The result was that early operators like Thompson went into combat with adequate technical skills but limited psychological preparation for the stress of engaging armor at close range. The attrition rate among early users was high. Approximately 25% became casualties within their first 3 engagements. Those who survived developed the experience and confidence that made them considerably more effective. By March 1945, the training program had been refined based on combat lessons. New operators received a full week of training and were paired with experienced users for their first several engagements when possible. This mentorship approach transferred the psychological skills and tactical judgment that couldn't be taught in classroom settings. But tactical doctrine had evolved through combat experience as well. Initial doctrine had envisioned defensive employment, with operators positioned in concealed locations waiting for enemy armor to approach. This worked when enemy armor advanced into range, but was less effective when German tanks held back or when Allied forces were required to attack German defensive positions. Offensive employment required different tactics. Operators had to advance with friendly forces, identify positions from which they could engage enemy armor, and be prepared to fire at targets of opportunity rather than waiting in pre-selected positions. This was riskier, but it allowed tank killers to support offensive operations rather than being limited to defensive situations. Combined arms integration became increasingly sophisticated as commanders grew familiar with the weapon's capabilities. Artillery suppressed enemy positions while tank killer operators maneuvered into engagement range. Friendly armor provided covering fire and drew enemy attention while operators positioned for shots. Infantry protected operators from German infantry attempting to locate and eliminate them. Engineers cleared paths through obstacles to allow operators to reach effective firing positions. This integration made tank killers significantly more effective and survivable. Thompson's later combat engagements, after doctrine had matured, involved coordinated infantry protection, artillery support, and clear communication with friendly armor about target priorities. These improvements in employment were as important to battlefield success as the weapon's technical capabilities. The strategic impact of tank killer deployment extended beyond individual tactical engagements. German military intelligence tracked Allied anti-tank capabilities carefully. And the appearance of a weapon that could reliably penetrate Tiger armor from the front affected German operational planning. One intercepted German intelligence report from February 1945 assessed Allied anti-tank capabilities directly. The electromagnetic weapon deployed by Canadian forces represents a significant threat to all armored vehicles. Penetration capability appears unlimited. We have confirmed penetrations of Tiger frontal armor, Panther glacis, and King Tiger turret faces. No existing armor provides reliable protection. Recommend operational planning account for high vulnerability of armored forces in sectors where this weapon is deployed. This assessment influenced how German armor was employed in the war's final months. Already constrained by fuel shortages and mechanical problems, German armored forces now had to account for increased vulnerability to infantry weapons. This further degraded their effectiveness and contributed to the collapse of German defensive capability. The post-war period brought intense interest in the tank killer technology from multiple nations. The Soviet Union, which had captured some units and documentation during the final battles, attempted to reverse engineer the weapon. American and British researchers conducted detailed technical assessments to evaluate whether similar weapons should be developed for their own forces. The consensus was that the tank killer had been effective, but was approaching the limits of its technological approach. The electromagnetic acceleration system required more power than the capacitor technology of the era could efficiently provide. The darts were expensive to manufacture and limited in utility, purely anti-armor weapons with no versatility against other targets. Future development moved toward recoilless rifles with improved propellants, while guided missiles with hollow charge warheads, and eventually wire-guided anti-tank missiles. The electromagnetic acceleration concept would not become militarily practical again for decades when improved power supplies and materials allowed railgun research to resume. But the tank killer's influence on anti-tank weapon philosophy was lasting. It had demonstrated that infantry portable weapons could defeat the heaviest armor if designed with sufficient capability, in encouraging the development of increasingly powerful anti-tank systems throughout the Cold War. It had also influenced tank design philosophy. If infantry weapons could penetrate heavy frontal armor, thickness alone was insufficient protection, a recognition that contributed to the development of reactive armor, composite armor, and active protection systems. For Thompson and the others who had carried tank killers in combat, the weapon remained a distinctive part of their war. In veterans' reunions and historical interviews, tank killer operators expressed pride in having used an advanced weapon effectively, respect for the engineers who created it, awareness of how fortunate they were to have survived, and recognition that most Allied soldiers had fought armor with far less capable weapons throughout the war. Thompson, in an interview conducted 50 years after the war ended, put it plainly. The tank killer was remarkable technology for its time. But I want people to remember that it was rare. Most soldiers fighting Tigers and Panthers had to make do with bazookas that couldn't penetrate frontal armor, or rifle grenades that required perfect shots on weak points, or mines that required getting extremely close to enemy vehicles. Those soldiers, fighting armor with inadequate weapons, were the true heroes of the anti-tank war. I had a weapon that made my job easier. They had courage that made impossible jobs possible. The fictional narrative of the tank killer engaged with themes that were real even if the specific weapon was not. The development of effective anti-tank weapons was a genuine priority for Allied forces throughout the war, and multiple nations worked on improving infantry capabilities against German armor. Canadian military research made important contributions to Allied weapons development, though the tank killer itself was a speculative invention. The tactical dynamics described, German heavy tanks operating with near immunity to infantry weapons, the psychological effect of seemingly invincible armor, the search for countermeasures, were all real aspects of the Second World War. The Tiger tank was genuinely feared by Allied infantry, and developing effective responses was central to both military effectiveness and soldier morale. The story also reflected real aspects of weapons development, collaboration between scientists, engineers, and military personnel, the challenges of bringing new technology from concept to deployable weapon, the resource constraints limiting production even of effective weapons, and the time lag between technological possibility and actual battlefield deployment. For readers interested in military history and technology, the tank killer narrative offered a speculative account of how advanced technology might have influenced specific tactical situations, how a single technical innovation could potentially shift battlefield dynamics and force an adversary to revise tactics and operational approaches. The ethical dimension of weapons development was present in the narrative, if not extensively examined. The tank killer was framed as saving Allied lives by enabling individual soldiers to defeat German armor that would otherwise have destroyed Allied forces. This framing, creating weapons to protect one's forces from enemy threats, reflects the standard justification for weapons development. But the same technology that saved Allied lives killed German tank crews in particularly brutal fashion. These moral complexities were part of the broader context of 20th century warfare, where technological advancement and industrialized killing operated on scales previously unknown in human conflict. The narrative concluded with Thompson's survival and his reflection on the weapon's impact, on him personally and on the broader tactical situation. The weapon had made him more capable, but it also made him a priority target. It had allowed him to accomplish missions that would otherwise have been impossible, but had required him to place himself in extreme danger repeatedly. It had altered battlefield dynamics without eliminating the fundamental human cost of warfare. These tensions, the way advanced technology both empowers and endangers those who use it, the way tactical advantages carry strategic complications, the way effectiveness in combat cannot be separated from human suffering, were central to understanding the role of weapons development in modern warfare. The tank killer, as a fictional construct, served as a vehicle for examining these themes through an account grounded in realistic tactical situations and plausible technological extrapolation. Whether such a weapon would have been called unfair by German forces is speculative, but the narrative's underlying point, that dramatically effective new weapons challenge established tactical assumptions and force adversaries to adapt, was grounded in historical reality. The introduction of any significantly superior weapon, whether tanks in the First World War, radar in the Second, or precision-guided munitions in later conflicts, required opponents to develop new tactics and countermeasures. The tank killer story was fiction, but it engaged seriously with real historical context, plausible technological extrapolation, and authentic tactical situations. It examined how a single technological innovation might have influenced specific combat outcomes, and how the introduction of new weapons shapes both the conduct of warfare and the experience of the soldiers who carry them.